This is now my fourth video on the new DLSS, and in this one I'm going to try to address some things that were not as thoroughly addressed in my previous videos, and some things that have been requested in the comment section. Number one, people have been requesting other games besides Cyberpunk, so Cyberpunk will be tested towards the end of this video, but I thought I'd bring in Clair Obscur Expedition 33 as an example of an Unreal Engine 5 game, as well as, you know, a game that won Game of the Year. A lot of people are interested in playing this, etc. So that's what we're looking at here. Also in this video, the primary focus is on the 50 series GPUs, whereas my initial video did 20, 30, 40, and 50 series GPU, but none of them in thorough detail. I then followed up on the 2060 in great detail, and then the 3080 in great detail. But now we're looking at the 50 series. These GPUs do have the FP8 acceleration, where this is actually designed to be used for. And also in this video, I'm going to be looking at things like ultra performance mode, as well as performance mode, balance, quality, and even DLAA. People have been asking about DLAA. And honestly, if you look at something like we're seeing here, preset L using ultra performance mode doesn't hold up that badly against DLSS quality using preset K, the older 4.0 mode. So in this video, we're going to do more than just compare things at the same presets. We're going to investigate a bit more, but to get there, first let's do performance numbers at like-for-like input resolution. So again, people did ask me to take a look at DLAA, and that is what we're looking at here. So Clair Obscur Expedition 33 doesn't have TAA, it has TSR, which is a more advanced version of TAA, and the native version of that runs at 57 FPS. The older DLAA, preset K, ran at 59, and the newer one, preset M, runs at 49 FPS, only hitting 83% of the performance of the old version. So yeah, DLAA using the new model is going to be pretty rough. Again, all the testing in this video is done on a 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte to represent a mid-range current gen card. Now, using quality level upscaling, we see that preset K hits 79 FPS, whereas preset M hits 72. So it loses 9% of the performance, which is a pretty big hit, but is still much faster than native TSR in this game. By the way, all the testing here is being done at high graphics preset in the game, with all the motion blur and other post-processing effects turned off. Now, if we go down to balanced level upscaling, we see that the older version, preset K, the 4.0, hits 86 FPS, whereas preset M hits 80 FPS. That's reaching 93% of the performance of the old version, so it is 7% slower, although still significantly faster than native. Now, what if we go ahead and try out performance mode upscaling, which at 1440p I didn't used to like to do. That's only a 720p internal rendering resolution, but this new model interestingly does two things. One, it improves the image quality on performance mode pretty significantly. We'll look at that more carefully in a second, but also it closes the gap on preset K. It's now reaching 90 FPS compared to preset K's 93, so it's only a 3% performance loss. In other words, it's about the same performance as the old model, but looks better. Here's a closer look at the image quality. So this is slowed down. And by the way, it's not VSync locked. So there is some screen tearing. Ignore that. That's an artifact of the capture. But when we're actually looking at the details here, this is preset K's performance mode, the older 4.0, versus preset M, the newer 4.5, in performance mode. And notice, like, when shadows cross the character's back, how dithered and broken they look on the old model in performance mode, how much better they look on the right-hand side. Also, if we look at just general level of detail, I would say it actually seems pretty similar between the two, and some things look a little bit sharper and more defined, in my opinion, on the right-hand side. Now, if we look at the branches and leaves, I once again prefer the look on the right-hand side of the screen. So in other words, I think that this is pretty clear evidence that the newer performance mode upscaling looks better, at least in this game, compared to the older version's performance mode. And the performance frame rate-wise is very, very similar. Again, we had a larger performance gap between the other presets, but using the performance mode upscaling, they actually close the gap pretty well. So what we're looking at here is actually what I was showing you at the very start of the video. I thought that the improvements to the new performance mode actually put it somewhat on par with the older quality mode upscaling. Now, there's some pros and cons between the two. Again, the left-hand side of the screen has a lot more internal rendering resolution to work with. But again, I feel like the way the shadows are dithered on the left-hand side of the screen looks distracting and kind of broken, whereas on the right-hand side of the screen, it looks a lot more put together. Again, when I look at things like the leaves in the trees, and things, little details around the screen, I don't think that there's any noticeable loss of detail on the right-hand side of the screen. There's certainly some pros and cons to each, but what I'm trying to get at here is if you're somebody who previously used DLSS on a 1440p display, but you didn't like to go below the quality preset, I think the real advantage of the new 4.5 model is allowing more aggressive settings to now be usable. Again, it's not an exact match here, but I wouldn't say that one is dramatically better than the other, but the newer one is running faster. We have 89 FPS here versus 79. So that kind of makes sense. The other thing I wanted to look at is comparison against native 1440p. So again, if you're not using any branded upscalers like FSR, DLSS, or XESS in an Unreal Engine 5 game, then you use TSR. This is the Unreal Engine 5 TAA, but it's more advanced than the older versions of TAA. So this is a native 1440p on the left-hand side of the screen. And on the right, we have the preset M performance mode. This is 720p internal rendering resolution that's having the new model upscaling it to the 1440p output. And again, I think it holds up really well compared to native rendering resolution. So I think with this new model, I'm kind of revising the DLSS settings that I'm willing to use for certain output resolutions. When we were back on DLSS 3, I used to not like to upscale at all at 1080p. On 1440p, I didn't want to go more aggressive than quality, and on 4K, I would use quality or balanced. Whereas when we got the new DLSS 4 transformer model, the first gen of it, I started using DLSS quality at 1080p, balanced at 1440p, and I'd even go down to performance mode at 4K. Well, now I'm saying that, at least in the games I've tested, the performance mode at 1440p seems actually fairly usable here. Next thing I'm testing out here is the ultra performance mode, because I used to find the ultra performance mode, especially on a 1440p output, any output below 4K, and I didn't even like it at 4K, but I found below 4K pretty much unusable. And because of that, I thought it'd be interesting to test out the new preset L here. And notice that preset K and preset L actually perform the same. They're both giving us 104 frames per second. But now let's look at the image quality in a little bit more detail. I would say that the right-hand side of the screen looks dramatically better than the left-hand side of the screen. Look at the little, confetti rose petals floating in the air. There's ghosting and breakup on both sides, but I think it's noticeably worse on the left-hand side of the screen. The shadows on the player character look absolutely awful on the left-hand side of the screen, much more solid on the right-hand side of the screen. And just in general, look at like the tree leaves on the left. They're kind of smudgy and smeary and losing a lot of detail on the left. And on the right, they're actually still fairly distinct details. Now, remember, you're watching a YouTube compressed video that's also captured video, which has its own compression compared to playing on your own display. So I'll actually tell you that seeing this in person on the display even actually further accentuates how much better the new model looks. So what I'll say here is ultra performance mode is certainly not going to be my go-to at 4K, but using preset L, at 1440p, but using preset L, I would actually say it's somewhat usable. It's a respectable choice if you want the performance gain for the image quality trade-off, whereas previously I would never even consider ultra performance mode on a 1440p display. So notice what I'm looking at here now. I've switched the left-hand side of the screen to be DLSS quality from the first-gen transformer model with preset K 4.0. On the right-hand side of the screen, we're looking at the newer preset L in ultra performance mode. So again, huge difference to the internal rendering resolution that we're working with here. But again, I feel like these hold up fairly well in the side-by-side. I would not say that the new ultra performance mode looks significantly worse than the old DLSS quality. In fact, like I said, the shadows on the player character I actually think look a little bit more put together on the right than they do on the left. Now, if you look at like the polka dots on the left versus the right on the player character's clothing, I did think that they, because of the increased internal rendering resolution, I do think those come through better, especially in the shadowed scene right here. On the player character on the left. So I do still think the DLSS quality from the old model has some advantages over the ultra performance mode in the new model. And I think the ultra performance looks slightly more blurry on distant details. But again, I think it's now at least good enough that it's worth considering if you need the performance boost, whereas before it was completely unusable. Last thing I want to look at for the ultra performance mode is against native TSR. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we have native TSR. So that's the full 1440p resolution and using Unreal Engine 5's advanced temporal anti-aliasing TSR. We're in kind of the mid-50s FPS range, whereas on the right, with the ultra performance mode preset L, we're over 100 FPS. And again, certain elements using the newer DLSS, I do think look a little bit better, even compared to the native TSR image. But I think just having the higher internal rendering resolution does give some advantages. Again, especially when both player characters are in shadow, like right here, the polka dots on the clothing like come through a lot more pin-sharp detail on the left than they do on the right. So I'm certainly not saying that the ultra performance mode is as good or better than native TSR, but I do think it holds up well enough, like I said, that given the doubling of performance almost that we're seeing here, it's at least something to consider using. If you find the loss to image quality to be somewhat minor, but the doubling of frame rate to be pretty major, and to be clear, we're not using any frame generation here. This is all just super resolution that we're testing. Like I said, ultra performance mode is now somewhat worth considering even on a 1440p display. That being said, let's do some 4K testing. So moving to 4K, we're now looking more at the performance here against native. Using performance mode upscaling, on the older preset K, we got 63 FPS. The preset M now gets 59. So we're reaching 94% of the performance we used to, so losing 6% of the performance. However, compared to native, which was only 31, we're almost doubling the performance. Now, let's look at some close-ups. Now, for 4K resolution, I'm using a 2x zoom, which actually, like per axis, which basically means what you're looking at here would fit nicely onto if you're watching this on a 1080p display. Because I know not everybody has a 4K monitor. So I'm using the 2x zoom now so that those of you on a 1080p display can actually see all the pixels of detail. Whereas if I left it zoomed out, you couldn't actually see the minor differences between the two. So here we're looking at the DLSS performance on the old model on the left, new model on the right. And again, I do think that the dithering in the shadows looks better on the right compared to on the left. And in general, I think there's just a little bit more detail to things like the flower petals sitting on the ground, things like that. So in general, I do think that the right-hand side looks a bit better than the left-hand side, although again, it is running a little bit slower. Remember, there was about a 6% performance loss, but I overall prefer the image on the right compared to the image on the left. But let's go ahead and also look at some other side-by-side comparisons rather than just performance mode versus performance mode, right? So let's go ahead and switch up the left-hand side of the screen. So on the left-hand side of the screen now, we're looking at TSR native. So this is native 4K using Unreal Engine 5's TSR on the left-hand side of the screen. And the right-hand side of the screen is, again, the newer preset M DLSS 4.5 performance mode. Remember, frame rate-wise, it's about double the performance on the right-hand side of the screen. And again, I would argue that there's not much image quality loss. Now remember, the left-hand side of the screen is only running at around 30 FPS and it's not VSync locked capture, so there's some judder and stutter to that footage that you're seeing because of the low capture frame rate and out of sync capture frame rate. So don't judge the image quality based on that. But yeah, I think a lot of this stuff actually looks as good or better on the right compared to the native resolution image on the left. Again, I'll let you guys judge for yourself. Keep in mind, we've got YouTube compression combined with my own capturing it, having its own compression. So things do always look, the pin sharp detail is really what doesn't come super well through YouTube compression. I'm trying my best by slowing down the footage. By having slower footage here, it helps the YouTube compression not be absolutely terrible, but it still doesn't completely solve the issue. But anyway, you can make up your mind on what you think about the image quality. I certainly think the one on the right looked just fine. What we're going to look at next, though, is ultra performance mode upscaling. So the older preset K gains performance all the way up to 75 FPS versus the native TSR at 31, whereas preset L, which again is the newer mode designed for ultra performance upscaling, it hits 72 FPS. So now they're pretty close. It's only 4% slower on the new model. So let's look at some slowed down, zoomed in side-by-sides. So here we're looking at ultra performance mode on both sides of the screen, but you're looking at the older model on the left, the newer model on the right. And I would say the right just looks clearly better. Like, I don't think it's even close. I think the image on the right just looks substantially better. And again, it's only running 4% slower on the 5060 Ti. Pay attention again to the dithering in the shadows on the left and the breakup in those on the left versus how much more cohesive that looks on the right. Look at tree branches right now. Look at the leaves on the trees. They're considerably more put together on the right-hand side of the screen compared to the left. Look at the flower petals in the street on the right versus the left. And then you can just kind of look at character details, etc. I think just in general, the right-hand side of the screen looks substantially better than the left-hand side of the screen. There's also less ghosting on the characters from frame to frame in motion. So I would say overall, the entire image just looks noticeably better on the right. And like I said, it's only running 4% slower compared to the one on the left on the 5060 Ti. Again, the older graphics cards had more of a performance hit with the new model, but the FP8 acceleration on the 50 series is certainly putting in some work here. So what I decided to do once again is not match the internal rendering resolution. So on the left, you're now looking at DLSS performance mode, not ultra performance mode. That's an internal rendering resolution of 1080p upscaled to 4K on the left, but using the older model. On the right, we're looking at the ultra performance mode still. Using preset L. That's a 720p internal rendering resolution that's outputting to a 4K image. It's kind of insane. Remember, we're on a 2x zoom right now, so it's blowing out the details pretty considerably here, and then there's the YouTube compression and all of that. But, I mean, guys, do you feel like the right-hand side looks significantly worse than the left-hand side? Because I kind of don't. I think they're fairly comparable. There's some things that I think are better on each one. I actually think ghosting in motion might look a little bit better on the right than the left. And I do, again, think the dithered shadows on the left look worse. Whereas I think some of the details, due to the higher resolution, look a little bit better on the left-hand side of the screen. But what I'm trying to say here is that the new Ultra Performance mode is at least somewhat comparable to the old performance mode in image quality, at least in this test. I don't think it's quite as good, but it's not terrible, and it gets significantly more performance. So the last thing I want to look at here is the native TSR on the left-hand side of the screen against the ultra performance mode on the right-hand side of the screen. Remember, that is native 4K resolution on the left-hand side of the screen using Unreal Engine 5's heavy TSR anti-aliasing. And on the right-hand side of the screen, we're looking at 720p upscaled to 4K with a 2x zoom on it and slowed down to look at the details. And yeah, I think the left-hand side of the screen looks better. If I look at the tree branches and leaves, I think they're more put together on the left-hand side of the screen. Each individual polka dot on the shirt on the left-hand side, I think pops a little bit better on the left. I do think the dithered shadows still look better using the new DLSS model on the right than they do on the left. But in general, the detail on like the fountain in the background right now, I think you can get maybe a little more detail on the left. Although again, certain elements of the image aren't necessarily worse on the right. But what I'm trying to show here is that the new ultra performance mode doesn't necessarily look better than native 4K, but it doesn't look substantially worse. I would put it at least in a usable category, especially if you're on a card like a 5060 Ti, which completely struggles at a native 4K, but can do reasonably okay on using ultra performance mode upscaling, now that it actually has a decent presentation. So what we're going to end with, and sorry, my kids seem to be stomping upstairs right now. I don't know if that's coming through on my mic. What we're going to do now is look at some Cyberpunk tests. For one thing, to check the scaling of percentages and everything compared to what we saw in an Unreal Engine 5 game. One difference when we're looking at DLAA versus native TAA here is that Cyberpunk isn't Unreal Engine 5 and it uses native TAA, which is a lot lighter than TSR. So notice that here, DLAA with preset K is significantly slower than the native TAA in Cyberpunk, compared to TSR, where it was about the same performance in Clair Obscur. Preset M's DLAA is significantly slower than preset K. It only reaches 85% of the performance. So this is again confirming in another title that using DLAA with the new model might not be the best choice unless you have a lot of performance headroom. It loses a lot of performance compared to the old version. Now, if we check out DLSS quality, we see that preset K hits 94 FPS, and preset M only hits 84. So it's actually 11% slower on the new model. So this is even on a 50 series card where we have the FP8 acceleration. But one reason why I'm testing out Cyberpunk again is because if you look back at my videos testing out the 3080 and the 2060, those older gen cards, the 20 and 30 series cards, DLSS quality with preset M runs slower than native TAA in Cyberpunk. Here, it's faster, although only slightly faster. 84 FPS versus 80. But I do want to make that distinction because it is true that the 50 series is handling the DLSS quality with preset M significantly better than the 20 and 30 series cards did, to where you actually do get better performance than native, just not by much. So this is a case where you might use it instead of DLAA. Depending on the game, you'd probably want to play around with it compared to the preset K DLAA and then the native TAA. Going down to DLSS balanced, you'll notice that the performance gap between preset K and preset M is shrinking. Now preset M is reaching 93% of the performance of preset K at 100 FPS versus 108. Whereas native TAA, again, was hitting 80 FPS. So balanced mode is both closing the gap on the old version, although there's still a noticeable gap, but is also significantly faster than native here. So once again, showing that the 50 series is handling this a lot better than my 20 and 30 series testing. Again, in Cyberpunk footage here, I'm not going to do a bunch of detailed slowdown side-by-sides the way I did in Clair Obscur, because I've already done that in my 30 series video. If you want thoughts on the image quality in Cyberpunk, look at the video I did before this one, which was testing out 30 series GPUs, and I did more of the slowed down VSync locked side-by-side footage to compare image quality. So here, we're more just looking at the performance numbers. Now, if you want to use performance mode upscaling, now, once again, preset M continues to close the gap a little bit. It's 119 FPS versus 125 using the older preset K. So now we're only 5% slower, whereas native TAA was running at 80 FPS. So they're both significantly faster than the native rendering. Now, again, when I was doing my image quality analysis, the newer performance mode does look significantly better than the older performance mode. And so I think that means it's a lot more usable. So this is a case where, again, I think the real advantage of the new model is being able to use the more aggressive preset compared to the older preset, and that gets you some additional performance to work with. So even though this is slightly slower than preset K, even when using the performance mode, but I think image quality wise, we're more similar to the older one in balanced or quality mode. So that's where you kind of gain back something. Now, if we go ahead and check out ultra performance mode, I switched the right-hand side to using preset L, which NVIDIA has stated is more designed around ultra performance upscaling. So ultra performance preset L on a 1440p output here is hitting 151 FPS, whereas the older preset K is hitting 154 FPS. So our newer model is reaching 98% of the performance of the older model. So this is an example, once again, we saw the same thing in Clair Obscur, where when you get to the ultra performance preset on a 1440p monitor output, the performance difference between the new model and the old model has essentially been eliminated. They're basically the same performance. And image quality wise, you'll see it again here, even though I'm not slowing it down. The preset L looks significantly better than the older preset K. Preset K looked unusably bad on ultra performance upscaling with a 1440p output, whereas preset L, again, not my top choice, but is actually a reasonable choice to consider using now if you really need a huge performance boost. Next, I switched to 4K. So notice we're now looking at 4K, not looking at 1440p. But here I'm just going to focus on ultra performance and then performance upscaling. Native TAA at 4K Ultra on the 5060 Ti was only hitting 35 FPS, whereas preset K using ultra performance upscaling got all the way up to 94 FPS. That's way more than doubling the performance. We're getting close to tripling the performance. And yet it looks kind of bad. Whereas preset L is hitting 90 FPS, reaching 96% of the performance of preset K, but the ultra performance mode upscale actually holds together pretty well. Again, not my top choice, but it looks usable compared to the older version, which I kind of consider mostly unusable. On the 4K output, like maybe in a huge pinch, but looks significantly better using the newer model. So that is the tests that I ran for you guys today. Oh wait, I have one more. What am I doing here? Oh yeah, sorry, I hadn't done performance mode. I forgot, I started ultra performance mode at 4K. So one more 4K test, sorry guys. So at 4K, I also tested out performance mode. And I just noticed a typo. My goodness, guys, we were getting through the whole video without a typo until right here. I fixed this. This is preset M now. This should be preset M. So I'm gonna like cover that up with myself. Okay, that's an M. I'm an M, okay? Now, preset M using performance mode, because again, preset L is for the ultra performance mode, we see 61 FPS, whereas preset K hit 66. So we're 8% slower than the older model, although I do think the image quality does look better. Native TA, again, is only 35 FPS. So that is actually all the tests that I ran for you guys today. Again, if you want more thoughts on the image quality comparisons in Cyberpunk, my previous video did a lot more work with that. So this video is pretty long. Let's get some final thoughts. So my overall thoughts so far are that yes, presets M and L, the newer 4.5 modes, are definitely heavier than the older preset K, even on the 50 series GPU. That being said, the 50 series GPU does prove to handle it better than my 20 and 30 series GPUs in my testing, where even quality mode upscaling is faster than native, whereas on the older generations, it was actually slower than native. That being said, there's enough of a performance hit that shrinks the more aggressive your presets get, that I do think that the newer models do make the most sense to use for performance mode and ultra performance mode upscaling. And that being said, that's where I think we see the most improvement to the image quality. Ultra performance mode has gone from something I would never consider using to something that I think is reasonable to consider using on a 1440p or 4K monitor, whereas previously I just wouldn't do it. And the performance mode upscaling, which previously I would not use on a 1440p display in anything other than the most desperate circumstances, I would usually stick to quality or balanced. I now think that the performance mode with preset M actually works pretty well, and it's not much slower than the older preset K, at least on my 5060 Ti. Again, the more aggressive the settings got, the smaller the performance drop-off was for the 5060 Ti. So really, this is emphasizing the conventional wisdom that seems to be going around and what NVIDIA stated. You can use presets M and L on the higher internal resolutions. You can use it for DLAA. You can use it for DLSS quality or balanced. But it really seems to shine on performance and ultra performance upscaling. And for the 50 series GPU, it also had less of a performance hit the more aggressive we got on the settings, which was kind of interesting to see. And I can definitely confirm that the 50 series GPU runs it a lot faster than the 20 and 30 series GPUs. It was also nice to see some testing in another game, Unreal Engine 5 super common engine, and I thought that it held up pretty well there. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. Are you interested in even more testing? I'm feeling a little bored of the performance testing. I'm wondering if doing a little more image quality testing in a wider variety of games would be good. Because if I didn't have to look at so many testing combinations, in each game, I could focus more on image quality in a wider variety of games. So I'm kind of thinking about just focusing in on performance mode and ultra performance mode, but in a wider variety of games against the older models and native. So let me know if you guys would be interested in some of that testing, and I hope all of you guys have an excellent day.